There we go. Well, good afternoon. It's good to see each and every one of you. Thank you guys for coming back and shortening your nap. This afternoon, we have our Q&A session. And so we're going to do it a little bit differently. Rather than letting Chad speak the whole time, I will be facilitating and asking him questions, so it gives him a little bit of break because we've been working him hard today and this weekend. But we've had quite a bit of questions that were submitted, and so I'm excited to hear Chad's response to them, but I know he's definitely excited just from talking to him and so on. So we'll also have an opportunity if a question does come to mind. I'm sure you can raise your hand and ask that so we can have a conversation in regard to this, because that's what this is for. So we're going to do that. So we're going to have this Q&A session, and at 5 o'clock we'll have a couple songs, and then Chad will speak to us again and have another conversation, and then that'll be it for a digital parenting workshop. So without further ado, Chad, we have quite a bit of questions to go through, but we've had one that was submitted to us asking the question of, what about sextortion? I've read recently about a number of teens who have experienced this, and in a very short amount of time, hours have taken their lives because of it. How can we talk to our kids about preventing it, or even how to handle it if they get caught up in it? So can you elaborate, kind of define, well, for those who don't understand what sextortion is, but overall, is that not? All right, we'll switch.
I like using the handheld anyway, so I think that's the same one I had this morning. Sextortion. That we're starting off with a low ball, softball question, I guess, right? I'm joking, of course. This is a very interesting, very difficult question. So, has anybody ever heard that term before? Anybody? Okay. So obviously you can tell what it is. It's extortion for means of all sorts of, I don't know exactly what to say. I know there's some smaller kids in here, but it's a form of blackmail where somebody threatens to share your private, often sexual images, videos, information, unless you give them something. That's what it is. And so it's usually most of the time, it's usually for more images or money, and I'll go ahead and say this, and you can just use your imagination, other favors, right? And so that's what this is. And so this is how this usually happens. Someone tricks or pressures that person into sending those explicit photos and videos. So usually there's some sort of request or trickery involved in that. And you've probably heard these stories all over the place with this. And then they threaten to post them online, send them to family or friends, or ruin their reputation unless kind of the victim meets their demands. So it's interesting to think about this. The blackmailer, the person doing the blackmailing, can be a stranger. It can be someone that you have met online, or it could actually even be someone the victim knows. So it could quite literally be anybody. It does not have to be perfect strangers. That's kind of the danger here. And where do you think, I'll give you another question here. Where do you think this would primarily begin, maybe? What's some ideas you have about that? Where do you think this would start? Exactly. Anybody have any idea? Snapchat or school? Okay. Well, it's going to start, specifically, it's usually going to start on some form of social media, because the person is going to be aware of your presence on social media. They're going to be probably following you, which is, again, important that you make sure your child has a private or protected account. All the different services, Snapchat, Instagram, and stuff like that, they offer that kind of thing. You can actually do something on Instagram called a protected account, meaning they have to request to follow you. They don't just get to follow you, okay? And so you can actually enable that for your child, but that's something you have to go into their settings and you have to enable that for them. So make sure that you do that, again, on any social media network that you allow your child to access. But it can also happen a lot on messaging apps. You can get anonymous messages. I know you have gotten spam messages from Instagram and definitely from Facebook, but maybe you've even gotten text message scams, especially if you've paid a toll on a toll road. Any time in the last week or two, you've probably gotten that scam, right? Don't pay those tolls, by the way. They will never contact you by text, okay? So again, this kind of sextortion happens, And so it often starts on social media, though. Here's what you need to remember, and this is what I got written down here. Obviously, it's illegal, okay? Law enforcement treats this very seriously. Victims are not at fault. No matter if it is discovered in the investigation that you are the victim or whatever, victims are, the blame always lies with the person making the threats here, okay? It can happen to anyone. Young people are definitely targeted. And I will go ahead and tell you this. It's not just our young women that are targeted in this. Increasingly, it is our young boys that are being targeted with this as well, okay? And here's the thing to remember about it, though. Getting help quickly is going to stop this situation from getting worse, okay? So the quicker that this can be, I don't know if y'all have the phrase here in Texas, but in Alabama and in Tennessee, we say, if we nip this in the bud, right, then that's going to be key here, okay? If you know of anyone or if you have faced this, here's a couple of practical things that you need to remember. Don't ever pay them. Don't ever exchange any kind of money, gift cards, any of that kind of stuff. Don't exchange any of that. It often makes things worse. It leads to more threats. It leads to more extortion, all sorts of different stuff. If you have somebody undergoing this or you or someone you know is going through this, save the evidence that you can. All of that evidence, screenshots and things like that, are admissible in court. On Snapchat, for instance, sometimes those messages are pre-programmed to disappear after a certain amount of time. So you'll want to have a Snapchat, you'll want to have screenshots of those. Now, I'm not exactly sure how that stands. Snapchat actually used to send a message to the person to tell them that you screenshot it. So they may know that you have screenshotted it. But, I mean, they're the ones making the threats. They're the ones that are going to be in trouble, okay? Obviously, report it, if you can, to your local police, to your police. Let them know the platform where it happened. File a police report if you have to. And then here's the thing for teens that I tell teens all the time is tell a trusted adult, and hopefully that's a parent, but tell a trusted adult. If you have a teen, if you have any child who has gotten caught up in this, or adult for that matter, there can be a certain degree of shame that's along with this. Shame for having answered the message or whatever, or being scammed or anything like that. But your teenagers, your young people need to know that they can come to you as a parent, that they can come to you as a mentor if you're in that role, that you will be able to help them, and you're not going to come down on them, you know what I mean? And so they need to you need to be a safe place. That's what this really is. You need to be a safe place for them, okay? So emphasize, that you're not going to react in a rash way when they tell you. Encourage them that they can come to you with these kind of concerns. Any secondary questions added to that? Anything to add? Say that again? No. It's not really reversible. So that's the thing about any of this kind of stuff. A picture is just a collection of data. And it can be copied, it can be transmitted, it can be stored, any of that kind of stuff. So there's no erasing it or getting it back. Now if it had stayed on a person's personal stuff, if they had not stored it in a cloud, if they had not put it on or sent it to somebody else. See, that's the thing, is that a picture is as simple as sending a text message to somebody. You can send it, I could send a picture to everybody in my contact list just sitting here in 10 seconds. So it can be almost infinitely distributed. And there's been so many stories about this that you've probably seen of teens, like you asked on the question here, taking their lives with these things. It's gotten so serious. And so there's really not any kind of way to just vacuum cleaner all that stuff back up. That is why I think we need to do and have a lot of education around for our kids to say, once you send something It is out there. You might as well consider that completely lost or out in the world. Because once something is out there, it is out there. Now, there's certain situations you could probably get rid of that data if it didn't go far enough. But in most situations, that's not the case. But that's a good question. Other questions with this? Okay. We're going to answer all the questions today, Dan. There's going to be no more questions.
We're going to be here all night. Well, I think with that topic is, for camps and things, is counselors have to take a sexual abuse course, right? And so I'm sure the laws, it is illegal, right? But very specifically in regard to, and this is why we need to have some proactivity with it and understand the severity of it, is if a kid comes up to me and reports some type of sexual abuse or sexual allegation, and I don't report that, I am therefore liable for that. And so it may not necessarily be the same circumstance in one. I'm entirely sure. I'm not a lawyer or anything, right? I don't know. But just taking that proactivity, this is a very serious issue. We have to investigate. We have to figure it out and nipping into the bud. Because sometimes we can, it's a digital age, sweep it under the rug, but it's a very serious thing, and it does affect, as Chad mentioned, the physical health of individuals, the mental health, but also, without a doubt, the spiritual health. Both of those two things. If your physical and mental health are not, on par with each other or great, or if something's affecting them, it is going to affect your spiritual life. So it's very serious in regard to. So thank you for answering that. Another question we have in regard to, and you've alluded it several times this morning, is what are the things we need to be aware of in regards to AI, ChatGPT, et cetera? These new features that make so many things so easy, are there implications for us as Christians to be aware of? So can you shed some light on that? Anything we need to know about pertaining to AI?
Oh, this one I'm really excited about. How many of you use any of these kinds of things, specifically ChatGPT? Okay? It's frankly incredible. So let me go back and say that, so AI is a misnomer. It's the marketing term, okay? It's the term that everyone in the industry has latched onto. It's not a technical term, okay? Artificial intelligence is, what we're seeing with these things is just what you're using ChatGPT, it's just a learning algorithm. It is not artificial intelligence. There is no intelligence behind this because this is a trained model, a large language model that you're seeing, and it's a learning algorithm. And you might think, well, that sounds a lot like artificial intelligence. Well, it's not. And so I will tell you that that is not the case. And so this is really, and the way that I have been able to put it and seen it in other places put it, is this is what we have as the next step of search engines. We had Google, and that was good for a long time. Now we've got this kind of stuff, which is a step towards artificial intelligence, but it's not AI. When AI actually happens, when artificial general intelligence is the discovery is made, that breakthrough is made, everybody will know it. It will change the entire world. Now, granted, ChatGPT has changed the tech industry, but it's not the kind of change that we're going to see with artificial general intelligence. Now, that could happen in 5 years. It could happen in 50 years. We don't know. But there is a lot of companies pouring billions and billions of dollars into figuring that problem out. So what I say is ChatGPT and other services like it, Google Gemini, things like that, basically I call that super Google, okay? It's super Google. It's Google without all the frills and the ads and things like that, and it gives me a conversational answer. I use ChatGPT basically every day. It's amazing, okay? Now, is it always correct? No, not at all. But when you think back, has Google always been correct? No. So my short answer to this is that we treat AI the same way, or we treat these ChatGPT learning algorithms, things like that, we treat it the same way we've treated Google for 25 years, with a grain of salt. We look at it, we say, okay, that's a good answer. It's well put together. It's very authoritative, but is it correct? So again, we need to test everything on that. And so that aside, When we think about caveats, ChatGPT, it's completely replaced Google for me. I wanted to tell you what I've done very briefly, and I won't go too much into it. Who likes reading their kids' school emails? That's right. None of you raise your hand because nobody likes doing that, right? Okay? And if you're a teacher in here and you write those school emails, I really do feel for you because I know parents need to read those things. However, this is what I did. I feel like some days I need to quit my job so that I can just read my kids' school emails, okay? So I'm sitting there thinking about how can I read what I need to read and get this information that I need to get, but I can do it in a very much more organized and succinct way. I had ChatGPT write me a script basically that takes all the messages that I get from my kids' school and puts them into a one-sentence summary for me that is delivered to my phone via text message or email every day at 5 p.m. So I can read all these things, the notifications that I've got. Hey, your kid's out of lunch money. This is a math test on this day, and this project is due on Friday. I can read that in one little sentence, and I know exactly what is going on. Now, it's not perfect, but it works. And so it's very interesting what ChatGPT and services like it can do for you, and it's very, very interesting. One other thing that I've done, and this is really interesting. One of the things I struggle with every year is to find 22 suitable Bible topics. So we have a men's Bible class on Wednesday mornings that always meets for 22 weeks between fall break and spring break. And I like to have a theme along those Bible topics. Well, I'm always struggling to come up with 22 topics on one theme. So I asked ChatGPT this year, I said, hey, could you give me a list of 22 topics with scripture references based upon the theme of the I am statements in Scripture? Boom. Something that would have taken me a day and a half to compile together took ChatGPT 20 seconds. And I went over every scripture reference on that list, and it was correct. Now, what's interesting about this, I give you these examples specifically because this is where, as Christians, I think we can get into a little bit of trouble. Because the way that a service like ChatGPT or these AI services present information to you is in the most authoritative way possible. This is it. This is how this is, and this is what it doesn't say, hey, I could be wrong about this, but, and gives you an answer. It doesn't say that. So what's very interesting is that when you ask it something that you know to be true and it gives you the wrong answer, you can actually go back in ChatGPT and go, now give me the right answer, please, and it will give you the right answer. And I'm like, what? So it's very, very interesting using this, and it's basically brand new technology. So I wanted to tell you about this. In 2022, ChatGPT was released. There was a big asterisk on it. It was sometimes wrong. OpenAI, the company that makes it, said that the failure rate could be up to 10%. So that means 1 out of every 10 queries that it got could be just flat wrong. Okay? This was in 2022. 1 year later, that failure rate had fallen to 2%. Okay? So 2 out of every 100 queries were wrong. Then now it's down to less than 0.5%. So 99.5% of the time you are getting an accurate, or at least according to them, getting an accurate question. Now what if I ask it a question like, is baptism necessary for salvation? What if I ask it a question of, how do I talk to my 13-year-old about X, Y, or Z? That's a much more highly subjective, not factual answer, right? And so we get into a lot of trouble. These large language models are only trained by what the information that they have been given, okay? They can give some really good and factual information, but when we start asking it spiritual questions, we start feeding it this kind of information, it could be correct, it could not be correct. And so that's why I say we should treat this a lot like we've treated the internet in general for the last 30 years, with a grain of salt. We should just look at it and be very scrutinizing about the answers that it gives us, okay? Now, if you're asking for a recipe for banana nut bread, then it's probably going to be right. But if we're asking a question about the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, we need to be very, very careful on where that takes us. I could talk about this for the next 4 hours, so you need to take this mic from me.
I think that not only applies to like text-based things, it also applies to like images and videos, specifically to biblical. I remember one of the high school kids asked me, or I can't remember exactly who, I got asked a question about the angels in the, in Scripture. Like, do you really think they look like that? Because AI images, they look really scary. It's like, I don't think they look like that. I don't know, but we also have to take images of how biblical characters and things like that are perceived and generated as well. I mean, that's just an example, but taking that with a grain of salt. Take, for instance, we're never going to know what Paul will look like. We're never going to know what Jesus looked like, without a doubt, because that's not the point, right? But anything. So I appreciate you covering that. Another question we have in regard to screen time and devices in general is, I've heard that reading on a screen does not stimulate your brain the same way reading on a page does. Can you address this? What might we need to be aware of regarding e-readers, et cetera, for adults and children? So e-readers, this would be like Kindle, Nook, and things like that, if you're unfamiliar with that. So can you address some of these things and the differences?
Oh, yeah. Here we go. So this is another favorite subject of mine, because you might think that I'm a nerd and I talk about technology all the time, and I would obviously be, I'm all pro technology, right? I'm actually I'm sitting here with a physical Bible. I brought a physical Bible with me, and I bring it with me everywhere I go. And so it's one of those things where I'm still very much a fan of physical books, but there is a difference here between paper reading and screen reading. So let's go to the next slide here, and I've got a couple of different points that I thought about with this, okay? So when we think about this in a way between screen reading and paper reading, something different happens in your brain, okay? And this is just how it is. Paper reading when you talk about cognitive engagement, paper reading tends to promote deep reading. It digs in, okay? Your brain tends to build a stronger connection. And again, when I say tends to, that means in most of the studies that we have today, this is where the studies have gone, is it tends to build a stronger connection with the material. Think about it this way. It's a more immersive experience, okay, with a paper book. But with screen reading, it's scrolling. It's clicking between things. Screen reading encourages skimming. It encourages like us skating across things more than we would, okay? Your brain stays in a lighter, more distracted mode when it looks at a screen versus when it looks at a book on a paper, because there's just less distractions, right? Now, the one thing you talked about, the question said e-readers, and you talked about Kindles specifically. I think a Kindle is one of those kinds of in-between devices where it's kind of got the best of both worlds. It's a screen, but it's also designed purposely to not look like a screen. Amazon was one of the first that pioneered e-ink screens. And that e-ink screen, it's got a very slow refresh rate. You have to tap on it and the pages turn a little bit slower. It's not quite fast. It doesn't have a frame rate that's really fast. And so it's not going to be something that you look at notes on. It's not going to be something you play games on. But it's one of those things that's been designed to be kind of a go-between that. So I don't know if I would count a Kindle as being a paper book, obviously, but I also wouldn't count it as a screen either. It's kind of an in-between product, which I think Amazon has done a very, very good job with. But I can still tell you that I am more engaged in a book if it is a physical book. You know what I mean? And as far as, I've got a couple of different things here. As far as memory and retention, studies in educational psychology have shown better recall when you read from paper. I have better recall. I'm a very voracious note taker. I take notes all the time. I don't take them on an iPad. I do not take them with an Apple Pencil on a screen. I do not take them on my phone. I have a pen and paper that I take notes with. And it helps me remember way better than when I was doing something on a screen. I don't know why that is, but that's Studies have shown that's what happens. And so paper in that second spot, it anchors your memory. Screens tend to let like those things be forgettable and float away. And then when you talk about brain fatigue, most screens emit blue light. Now, I don't know if you've got the setting on your iPhone or not, but there's a nighttime setting to where maybe your screen gets rid of all that blue light and prepares your mind, prepares your brain for the evening time. There's a reason why when the sun goes down over here, when it gets really low on the horizon, there's going to be a nice orangey light. That's a signal to our brains to start winding it down, right? I want you to tell my 11-year-old that. Start winding down, please, okay? But it's one of those things where the more orangey, blue light wakes us up. It's the bright light in the morning, the orange light, and I know you know these kinds of things. But screens tend to be like this, I guess, what I would call a mental caffeine crash, and paper gives us a little bit more mental endurance, okay? And then the last thing is like this tempting to be multitasking. I would argue, you may not agree with me, my wife disagrees with me. I would tend to argue that there's no such thing as a multitasker. There are people doing 3 tasks very badly at the same time. I don't think there's such a thing as a multitasker. I have to be very unitask in what I'm doing. I have to do this now, then I have to do this, then I have to do this. Not all 3 things at the same time, right? And I know what you're thinking. Well, there's certain situations where there's so many different things where we're doing so many things at the same time. Yeah, driving, dealing with kids. You know, I'm thinking about my notes here and the next question with Dan. I'm doing multiple things at the same time. But there's a difference between doing those things at the same time versus multitasking and unitasking. And so I think when you're reading on a screen specifically, and again, not counting a Kindle, you're just one notification away from a distraction. I read an author last week that was saying, we are being distracted to death. We are being pulled in so many different directions. Guess what? When I open a paper book, there's not going to be something that slides in from the top of a text from my wife saying, hey, can you get bananas on the way home? And I don't think I'm wrong about that. So screens invite interruption, and we can tailor those things to work for us in that way where they don't invite interruption. However, paper, again, allows that immersion, okay? And so that's my personal takeaway. I'm almost always going to reach for paper when I'm note-taking. I'm going to reach for a physical book if I can help it, or a Kindle. I've got a nice little iPad right here. I don't read on it because I don't want to see the other notifications from different things as well. And so if you have the ability, I would use different devices for that if you can. That's a really long answer, sorry.
That's okay. We're here for your answers. So I'm new to the Kindle space, so I've been telling people how different it is. Like, I've discovered sliced bread for the first time, and I've only been using it for a month or so, but it's a big difference. I wouldn't categorize it like you would. But I also will add to that is not only your brain does something different when it is experiencing a physical book. I think it's also, you ever opened a book and it smells weird? Like, and you kind of remember what old books smell like? But then you also can pinpoint like, oh, this smelled like this book that I opened 10 years ago, right? Your brain remembers that, but also with scripture, I question sometimes how people can read from their devices. If you do that, that's more power to you. I can't. I have to use my physical Bible, and that's because our brain uses spatial recognition and so on. And so I can remember this verse, this passage on this side of the page. So there's a big mental difference, but also different senses are engaged that aren't necessarily firing off when you're reading off your iPad and so on. So if you want a Kindle, shameless plug, get a Kindle. I will advocate for that. All right, probably the biggest question everyone's here waiting to answer here. Okay, the book question. All right, so we'll wait on that suspense. All right, the next question is, what are some good books or resources pertaining to technology? I'm sure you have quite a bit to...
I'm glad you asked. I have a picture on the next slide right here that says, oh, look, I took a picture. Literally, I couldn't bring the books with me because I'm flying on a plane, right? Usually when I go to I'm able to drive to a workshop, I have even more a stack of books in addition to this, and I will actually bring these books. And if you are not a reader, get these on audiobook. They're probably all available on audiobook. But I'll go through these one by one and just kind of give you a brief why I think they're good. Screens and Teens. Let's go back to the other slide with the stack. Thank you. The Screens and Teens, that's by Dr. Kathy Koch. Very good. Was written fairly early on, about over 10 years ago, but it's still very good at some of the things that it says. And all these books are available on Amazon. These are excellent reads. God, Technology, and the Christian Life, not about parenting, not about digital parenting, more about how God views our technology, which I think is a fascinating thing because we don't think about that very much. We think about, well, how do we use our technology to view God? Well, how does God view our technology? And so it goes through this whole thing about the Bible and how the Bible, the first uses of technology were using pitch to coat the inside of the ark. That was a technological innovation. Firing bricks to build the Tower of Babel, that was a technological innovation. And so he goes through this. It's incredibly interesting read. 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You by Tony Reinke. Excellent book. That one is about parenting. That one is about the effect that these devices are having on us. He has updated this since I bought that version, so make sure you get the updated version of this. He puts out a new version, I believe, every couple of years. But it literally goes through the ways, hey, you may not think about this, but this is the ways that your phone has changed how we think about this. In just a short span of time, 15, 17, 18 years that we've had the modern smartphone, it has changed society as a whole. Those two right there in the middle, Dangerous Playground, it may be hard to see, and Disconnect, both by Drew Kaiser and Jeremy Roberts. You may be familiar with those names. Those are what I consider brotherhood names, authors. They're Church of Christ, members of the Church of Christ. Drew Kaiser is actually a very good friend of mine. He actually is going through some struggles with like ALS and different things like that. So he's got a whole nother thing about that. But we were able to do a workshop together in Tennessee several years ago. And he's got a very, very good take on that, as well as Jeremy Roberts. He's got a very good take on just the idea of disconnecting and, seeing Scripture for what it truly is without the advent of technology and things like that. The last one's Wired Child. If there was a foremost voice in digital parenting screens besides Jonathan Haidt, who we will talk about on the next slide, Wired Child, Dr. Richard Freed has some amazing insights. And this is not even his best book. But Wired Child is really, really good, talking about what has happened to this generation of children in the last 15 years. And he goes through several different studies of children that were born and kind of grew up in high school in the early 2000s versus children who went to high school in like 2011, 2015 time frame, and compares and contrasts personality differences and all sorts of stuff. It's terribly, terribly interesting. And then the last one is actually not about technology at all. Raising Self-Reliant Children in a Self-Indulgent World by Glenn and Nelson. These are two doctors that did some really good studies. This is actually a book from like the 1990s. As my 11-year-old would call it, the 1900s. And it's a very, very good parenting book in general. But if you really look at it and you read between the lines, you can go, I can understand how that would apply to modern technology as well. And so it's really, really good. Let's go to the next slide. If you have not read this book, just forget all the others. Put this one on your list. Read it tomorrow. This is important for every single parent, I think, and grandparent for that matter, to read this book. It gives us so many important things to think about when it comes to not just parenting with screens, digital parenting, but the idea about how we are essentially, in some ways, losing an entire generation to these screens. He talks about, and he has 4 things that he really bases on these and says that schools need to do, that parents need to do. One of them that's very interesting, and I won't go over the whole thing, but one of them is very interesting is he says he encourages independent, unsupervised play with other children. Now, I know you're thinking like, well, that sounds really, really simple, right? But there's a lot of kids these days that never come out of their house. that they're on a screen from the time they get home from school, from the time, and they may not even go to school. They may be homeschooled, and they may not have hardly any interaction. He talks about all these practical things that we have lost just in the last 15 years that we need to kind of reclaim back. And it's excellent. I can tell you that right now. So go buy this book. I don't make any money off of this, by the way. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I did want to do this. My brother-in-law actually runs this site, and I don't tell you because it's my brother-in-law. I would tell you anyway because it's great. But just because it's my brother-in-law, he runs this website with Travis. He is a minister at a Church of Christ, and everything that he writes, we trust. He does book and movie reviews. He does all sorts of different stuff. He also builds Legos on YouTube, and so if your kids are into Legos, it's all incredibly appropriate and wonderful, and he does a great job at some of this stuff, and it's very current. He has reviewed all sorts of current books, current movies. He just did the Minecraft movie that just came out. He reviewed that, and he will tell you, if you're familiar with Common Sense Media, this is Common Sense Media, but it's free. It's not going to irritate you to pay them. He's going to have the review up there for free, and he's going to tell you all the different themes and different things like that are attached to it. So anyway, those are some resources. And then the final slide here, obviously you can go to digitalparentingworkshop.com/resources. And I've got every link that I talked about on these resources are on this page. In fact, I'll do you one better. There is a link at the top of the helpful links if you go to that webpage where I've got all of my notes from today that I'm literally talking to you right now. I posted on the web, so you can download the PDF of all my notes. Don't look ahead and don't spoil yourself for the rest of the session, by the way. But you can actually use all that. You can copy that. You can give it to other people. You can do anything you want to it with anything that you find on my website. And so just make sure you check that out for sure. And again, I don't make any money off of that. I'm not going to pay a subscription or anything like that. I'm not going to steal your data. It's just there for you to see. So.
That's not the big question yet. Is there a okay. All right, for the next big question that I'm referring to, that's the next session, so suspense is gone now. All right, so the next question we have is, can you describe or talk about how technology can desensitize us? Does technology lead to a lack of compassion to our world and others? It can, yes. I think so. Can you want me to give my reasoning on that? I think in regard to some things that I've referred to and looked at is, I think in regard to especially how the media is set up nowadays. As mentioned, big corporations are focused on money. They don't care how we feel, how it affects us, and things like that. Take, for instance, newspaper articles and headlines. You want to know what gets the biggest clicks and traction and traffic? It's the most negative ones. And so what are we fed the most? It is the most negative appealing ones, the most tragic ones. And so in finding all that and scrolling through all that on social media, seeing pretty disgusting and disturbing videos sometimes. I mean, I remember when the shooting that happened at a congregation in the DFW area that happened, they released the footage of the shooting that happened, and our brethren there, and to witness that is pretty disturbing. So sometimes even with that, it can benefit. That's why it's worded that way in regard to that. It can desensitize you. Most often, sometimes it does because of we're getting fed so much negative things, and so that can feed to a lack of compassion and alleviation of other people because we expect that and can project that. So that's my reasoning. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. So.
I would second that. I would second that for sure, and I would add to that. If you think about how fast and how far we have come with mass media in this century, just think about that for a second. There's a channel on YouTube that I like to talk about or like to watch. There's some church guys that do some church stuff, and they talk about church management and all these technologies and things like that. And they talk about we're witnessing right now the biggest technological communication shift in 500 years. We are. The last one was the printing press in the 1400s. Now you might say, well, what? Hold on, Chad. What about TV? What about radio? Wasn't that a huge thing? Movies, television, wasn't that a huge thing? It was. It's not communication, though. It's mass media. It's not necessarily two-way communication. We are witnessing, we're right in the middle of the biggest technological revolution in 500 years, I would argue. And so when we think about how technology can desensitize us, we have never had so much information in human history. You're bombarded by more information in the first hour you're awake than the average human was 100 years ago for 10 days probably, right? And so we're constantly bombarded with advertisements, with all sorts of videos that we see online, with how we're scrolling through different stuff. We're bombarded with information through our emails and through our text messages and through all this different stuff. And so that right there alone can lead us to desensitize ourselves and say, you ever texted somebody and they don't respond, but they respond like a week later? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, is like this just onslaught of information. And so there's never been a time in our history where we've been bombarded with this amount of information. And so with that, there's going to be any kind of an amount of desensitization about it. We don't even talk about the war in Ukraine anymore. Still happening. People still dying, right? The war is still, there's buildings falling over and all sorts of stuff, but we don't talk about it because it doesn't sell clicks or anything. It doesn't, and even if we see that kind of stuff on the news, it's kind of like, oh, that's really bad. Okay, so anyways, and like we don't think about it that much, right? And we tend to see it through the window of a screen. It seems fake to us. We don't necessarily, that goes back to our kind of paper versus screen thinking about, we don't connect with it that much. And so when we think about over time, this constant flood of information can make this stuff seem ordinary. That's dangerous. I think that's very dangerous. And if we're not careful, it's going to what I call as Christians, it's going to erode our compassion. It's going to wear it down to almost nothing. And if we're not compassionate as Christians, then what are we doing? So we've got to make sure that this stuff does not desensitize us. Likewise, and I will stop after this, we need to be very mindful of what our kids are watching and seeing. We need to be very mindful of becoming desensitized. You ever watched a show where the F word is used every sentence? And suddenly, you don't hear it anymore. You're becoming desensitized to it. You hear somebody else say it, and then you might be so desensitized that you might say it out loud by accident. And so this whole desensitization kind of pulls in on itself. And so we need to be very careful about this. There's a certain amount of stuff that we can say and do with this, but again, it's one of those kinds of things where I think we have to remain vigilant that our compassion doesn't erode, that we continue to be Christ-like in what we're doing.
I will say, if you want more on that topic too, one book, in my opinion, is 12 Ways Your Phone Changes You. Talks a whole chapter dedicated to that. In fact, I think one of the first chapters is we forget about our own flesh and blood. And so he gives the example of texting and driving. And whenever the laws came out of, it can wait, came out, as the phones were elevated, right? It's pretty open to see someone texting and driving. You can still see it today when you drive around Houston anyway. But it's now lowered now. So the eye line with the road is gone. And so there's that example of a lack of compassion, of I'm no longer compassionate or caring about somebody else on the road, nor even myself in regard to that. And so when we look scripturally and biblically and how God designed us to be, is that's forgotten in regard to that. All right, last question that I have is... Okay, we can do that. That's fine. All right, last question we have, and we'll cover perhaps another one with time that we have, is I use my iPhone for so much. It's my phone, my camera. Is that it? There it is. Okay, nice. I use it for grocery shopping, work-related texts, and all manner of communication. It's my book via Kindle app, my map/GPS, and my Bible. it's social media and business and everything in between. Is it possible to live without a smartphone in this culture when jobs and kids' school and everyone else expects you to have one? And are there tips or suggestions or a game plan for ditching the smartphone?
Let's go to that next slide. I love this picture. Everything in this picture is now in your pocket, right? Isn't that funny? And it's funny because there's a lot of redundancy here. He's got several different like stereos. He's got a typewriter. He's got a little Watchman on the right side right there, a little portable TV. Obviously got his boombox and his video camera and his videotape player and things like that. And it's funny because there's not any kind of Rolodex there. I put a $10 bill down on a table in front of a teen class one time, and I said, if you can tell me what a Rolodex is, $10 is yours. And every kid went to reach for their phones, and I went, can't ask anybody. You can't phone home for a phone a friend here. Tell me what a Rolodex is. And none of them knew what it was because we used to have to keep up with all this stuff. You think about what your phone does. It's more appropriate to ask what it doesn't do, right? And so when we think about how much these devices do, the short answer to this question, let's go back to the question on the screen, back one slide. The question is, yes, it's possible, but it's much more difficult. Let me ask the crowd today, has anybody had any experience trying to cut yourself off from using a smartphone? Has anybody went to one of these or went back to what they call dumb phones? Has anybody done that? Okay. And so it's one of those kinds of things where everybody talks a big talk about it, like, one day I'm going to get a flip phone. Nobody's going to do it, right? Nobody's going to do it. And because it's one of these things that it's like one of those necessities that we kind of have to live with. Now, I would argue there's some people at Graymere that have never gotten a smartphone in the first place, so they can't go back. They just have flip phones, right? But it's one of those kinds of things where we all have the fantasy of kind of disconnecting ourselves from that, and it's not really a reality. The bottom line for this is something that I said in Bible class this morning, as well as I think in the sermon. How do we control our technology so that it doesn't end up controlling us? Cal Newport, in his book Digital Minimalism, he actually said, he asked that phrase, he said, humans are not wired to be constantly wired. It's just a fact. And so how is it that we can disconnect ourselves from these things? This is I guess it would be some very simple advice. But to live without a smartphone, I would say live with the smartphone, but use it in a minimal way. Does that make sense? What I said about notifications this morning in Bible class, I saw people's eyebrows go up. I told everybody, turn off all your notifications, and there was 3 or 4 people that went, I don't know if I can do that. Yeah, you can. Yes, you can. Turn them off. The distraction, again, we're being distracted to death. Turn them off. You can actually make your phone a dumb phone if you want to. In fact, you can make your phone, here's what I do. There's something on the iPhone called focus modes. Is anybody familiar with that? Okay, focus modes. It's not hard, you don't have to program anything like that, but it's these modes that put your phone in a different state based upon parameters that you've given it. Anytime my phone detects that I am at my address of my home, it goes to a certain state. It turns the screen to black and white. It turns off all of my social media. It gives me a special home screen that only has texting, calling, a couple of other different things on there. I think maybe notes or something like that. It makes my phone a very boring phone, in other words. Now, I'm not saying I'm perfect, but this has really worked for me. Because when I go home, first of all, let me ask you this. Why would I put my phone in black and white? What's up with that? Why do you think that's the case? Anybody? It catches your eye, right? When you walk through Times Square in New York City, is it black and white screens everywhere? No, it's colors, it's twinkling lights, it's animations, it's things popping out at you. It's those little bitty red notification things on your apps. I saw somebody today looking at one of their phones, and I think they had 30 different notifications on different apps. I was like, that would drive me insane, right? And so when we think about that, you can tailor these things. You can tell this thing what to do. So do it. Take an hour and pare it all down. And I guarantee you it'll make a difference. And if you don't have time to do that or don't want to do that, here's another personal challenge for you, and you can challenge your kids with the same thing. Go to your screen time settings, and if you don't have that turned on, turn it on. In Google, if you have an Android phone, it's Google Play Family Link. So download that. It'll tell you what you're spending most of your time doing. It'll take it a week. It'll give you this report. Oddly enough, it gives you the report at 9 a.m. on Sunday morning. Just saying, so you'll know what to go forward for after the service is over with. And it will give you this report every week, and it'll say how many hours, how many minutes, what you spent on each one of the app, and it'll break it down for you. My challenge to you, even if you don't do the paring down of your phone or make it basically a very dumb phone, take the app off of your phone that you use the most. Now, obviously, there's going to be some exceptions to that. Messaging, phone, we probably can't take those off. You don't want to take off maybe email or maps, or if you're spending all your time on maps, we need to talk. But when you think about the app that you're spending the most time on, Facebook, take it off. It is no short thing of revolutionary how much difference it has been me taking the Facebook app off my phone. It's made a huge difference in my well-being. My sister will send me TikTok links all the time, and she forgets I don't have TikTok. I can't open it. I don't want TikTok. Not because it's a Chinese company, not because it's got bad stuff on it, because I just don't want to become addicted to one more thing. So it's kind of this idea where I have told my phone what it's going to do, not it telling me what it's going to do, okay? So start exercising that power as soon as you can. Start viewing the phone as a tool rather than as an entertainment device, and you'll start to see things differently, I think.
All right, we just have a couple of minutes, but we're going to ask a question, and very briefly, to your best of your ability, and you're going to cover in the next session as well. But is there a safe age to giving your child a phone, or I guess an age of accountability type aspect, or what is a good age to give your child a device?
What do y'all say? This morning I said what? I said 8th. I said there was an organization called Wait Until 8th. Okay? I did not say that you should wait until 8th. What I said, and what I mean to make sure to emphasize to you, is that you know your child better than anybody. Is that not right? You know your child better than anybody. My 11-year-old might not get a phone until he's 30, okay? Because I know who he is. He's exactly like me. I'll get to your question in a minute. And so when we think about you know your child better than anybody, your child may not be ready for a phone until they're 14. They may be ready for a phone at 12, and you don't give them one till 14. That's okay. You're the parent. You make the rules. Right? Also, by the way, you're paying the bills, so you can tell them what to do with it too. And there's a really good PDF on my website. I'm not trying to promote my website, but there's a lot of resources there. There was a woman that came up with like this 18 rules or whatever when she gave her son a phone for Christmas when he was like 14 or something like that. Some of them are hilarious rules. Others are just like, I never would have thought about that before. So check that out. It's really neat. But she goes over these different rules, and she has one of the rules that says, you are going to mess up on your phone. I am going to take your phone away from you, and we're going to talk about it. And it's just like one of those kinds of things like, let your children know what you expect of them when they have this device. First and foremost, let them know that it's not theirs. It's yours. You're just letting them have it for a little while, right? So it's very important that you kind of set this stage for your children when you're talking about this as far as phones go. Now, is there a safe age? I know that's what you're dying to hear. Is there a safe age? Again, 8th grade is probably my absolute minimum. You probably know kids that are way younger that have phones. Again, that's up to their parents. And again, you can make these phones, like I said in Bible class this morning, you can make these phones and texting machines, and that's it. You can do that. You just have to lock them down and stick to it. What I would not recommend is giving somebody less than 8th grade a phone that is completely unprotected, completely unblocked. I don't know if my children will ever know what an internet browser even is, because they will as long as they have their own device, they will never have access to a web browser. Period. There's just too much that you can go to, too much that you can find. They're just not going to have access to it. So again, you have to make those decisions as well. 13 is the age that social media networks like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, whatever, that's the age that they have said, okay, you have to be 13 to be on this website. Well, tell you what, if you've signed up your kids before the age of 13 for one of those social media networks, you've lied about it. You've lied about their birthday, and that's wrong. You shouldn't do that. And I would definitely, what I said this morning in Bible class, definitely not recommend. Maybe a phone is okay for the phone and for texting and maybe for some other rudimentary communication. But social media before 8th grade is absolutely out of the question, if you ask me. The worst idea in the world is to give a 6th, 7th, or 8th grader access to any kind of social media, period. That's just my opinion. You can take it as you want, but you asked the question, so I'm giving you my answer and my opinion. So it's one of those things that we have to make sure that we think about. And I'm going to address a lot of this in the next session as well. But we're getting towards the end of the session. We're going to have just a short break, and then we'll be starting worship and the last session. And I will tell you that the last session is the last session of the workshop that I normally do. So it's not really a sermon talk per se. It is a workshop session. So just make sure that you're prepared for that. But we will have a couple of songs and a prayer and things like that before we move on to that. But again, thank y'all very much. And again, I will be asking more questions as far as that in the next session. Thank y'all so much.
If anyone needs to go to the restroom or anything needs a break, feel free to do so. We'll start back at 5:05. Gives time to set up for this evening. So thank you guys so much.